Assalamu alaikum and good morning. On behalf of Institute of Regional Studies and the the Civil Society Coalition for Climate Change, I'm very pleased to welcome you to this seminar today, which is Perspectives on National Security Policy. We are very grateful for our distinguished panelists and our guests for joining us today, and we look forward to a fruitful discussion. Before we begin, we'd like to start from the recitation from the Holy Quran.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim.
In the name of Allah, the entirely merciful, the especially merciful.
Qul huwa Allahu ahad.
Say, He is Allah, who is one.
Allahu samad.
Allah, the eternal refuge.
Lam yalid wa lam yulad.
He neither begets nor is born.
Wa lam yakun lahu kufuwan ahad.
Nor is there to him any equivalent.
Before we move on, I would just like to tell everyone that if you want to tweet about the event, please tag the accounts that we've mentioned here for the two respective institutes. Now, I would like to request Ambassador Nadeem Riaz, President, Institute of Regional Studies, to please come on this stage and give his welcome remarks.
Assalamu alaikum and a good morning to everyone. It's really a pleasure of being here today and to welcome you all to this very important discussion on the national security policy. The format will be that I will make my introductory remarks, then the National Security Advisor will take a few minutes, and then we would like to have a question answer session because there are lots of queries which people have about the national security policy. And we would like to address these in this particular session. As you all know that the National Security Policy 2022-2026 is Pakistan's first national security document. It recognizes both traditional and non-traditional elements that impinge on our national security. It places economic security at the core of comprehensive national security, emphasizing a geoeconomic vision, supplementing the focus on geostrategy. The document, if you've had a look at it, contains 8 sections. The first one deals with policy formulation. The second one deals with conceptual elements of Pakistan national security framework. Then 6 thematic areas follow. Section 3 is on national cohesion. Section 4 on securing our economic future. Section 5 on defense and territorial integrity. Section 6 focuses on internal security. Section 7 on foreign policy in a changing world. And Section 7 on human security. The national security policy, as you all know, work started on it in 2014. It took 7 years to complete. And it was unveiled on the 14th of January this year. The policy has been a subject of much debate, praise, as well as criticism. Critics are of the view that the policy provides guidelines for its implementation, but does not identify the concerned government entities for specific policy guidelines. Thus, it is more of a mission statement than a policy. The policy does not provide a mechanism for a review of its implementation at regular intervals. And other criticism which you read is about the policy not identifying the benchmarks for the success of its implementation. And one other criticism is that the policy is to be implemented in the various provinces, an interprovincial coordination mechanism is lacking. A number of people have applauded the policy. They feel that the policy puts the right amount of emphasis on the prioritization of economic and human security. Likewise, it also builds on the NISP and provides a codified foundation for such policy instruments, which should ideally emanate from the NSP rather than precede them. Proponents also feel that instead of diminishing the importance of conventional security, the policy aims to create a synergy between economic and conventional security. The document of the policy provides a mechanism for the public to give their feedback for its improvement in the next cycle, 2026-2030. The policy more or less coincides with the second consolidation phase of CPAC that focuses on industrialization and thus strengthens economic security. Proponents also feel that the policy touches national security from all important perspectives, such as national cohesion, internal security, economic development, defense and territorial integrity, foreign policy, and human security. Although people think that the NSP may be vague in some areas, but it does provide an umbrella document, and it's not expected to deliver on the details. It provides a broad framework and a clear direction to policy-making decision makers in picking the right choices for resource allocation. And lastly, the NSP has taken years to compile, but as a living document that can evolve with time. It is very useful addition to the state policy toolkit. Today, we have the National Security Advisor, we have Senator Mushahid Hussain, we have an eminent panel. So please engage and interact with them. We have Aisha Khan who will be moderating the session. So over to you, Aisha. Before that, I would like to request the National Security Advisor, Dr. Mueed Yusuf, to give his introductory remarks. Thank you very much, sir.
Assalamu alaikum. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. First of all, Master Nadeem Riaz, IRS, and yourself, thank you very much for this opportunity to come and speak about the NSP. IRS is also part of the advisory board of Pakistan's National Security Committee, so it's doubly relevant for me to be here and speaking. As we were walking in, I was telling Master Nadeem that I think it'd be very useful if we can have a discussion. Otherwise, I can go through the whole policy and it'll, everybody's, I'm sure, looked at it and read it. So I'll just take a couple of minutes and then as you want, we can have a conversation that way. First of all, please understand that a document which is pitched at the level that NSP is essentially a statement of intent. It lays out where the country called Pakistan wants to go in the future. It gives you the overall direction. It lays out a guidance for the system itself, but it also then puts out a message, most importantly for its citizens, but equally for the rest of the world, on what this country wants to be going forward. That's what the NSP is. So if you want to judge the document, judge it with that benchmark in mind. So what is this policy saying? I think the policy is implicitly saying that we had a direction in the past where we want to make certain modifications and adjustments. It's saying that we have had a problem of not having defined what national security is for our country. And now we have codified that ultimate goal of national security, the purpose of national security is securing the citizens of Pakistan, both physically and in terms of economic livelihoods. To achieve that, the policy argues that economic security has to be the core of national security going forward. Because we are talking about traditional and non-traditional security, we have used the term comprehensive national security. What does it mean to have economic security at the core? Basically, Pakistan's fundamental problem in this realm is that our inflow of resources is less than the outflow of resources. So the amount of money we require to secure our average citizen is not available most of the times. That's essentially the problem. So we have to increase the size of the national resource pie to be able to redistribute judiciously, both for human security and for traditional security. Both of which, by the way, are under-resourced. If you look at the future threat spectrum for Pakistan, both are under-resourced. But if we don't have a larger national resource pie economically, we will never have the resources required to judiciously redistribute. So it will always remain a debate on guns versus butter. Whereas the goal of this policy is to talk about how we get to butter plus guns in that order of priority. That's essentially the statement of intent in a nutshell that this policy lays out. The second thing I want to say is there's a lot of debate about a shift to geoeconomics. This is not new. This has been talked about for years and years. I would even argue there is nothing new. There's no sort of innovation in the policy. It is essentially just bringing together a coherent direction that everybody has agreed upon. Geoeconomics and geostrategy and geopolitics are the same thing. The policy lays out a basic shift in priority, which says that we will focus on our geoeconomics to benefit our economic security. That's basically it. And how will we do that? We say two things, and then we lay a prerequisite for that. Number one, using Pakistan's location as a geoeconomic pivot, i.e. connectivity. So the decisions you will make on how to use your location will be based on economic connectivity before anything else. Number two, we want to look for true development partnerships with the world rather than only looking for assistance. That then gets into the space of investment and export and economic policy and all of that. And the prerequisite is that until you have peace within and in the neighborhood, it's going to be very difficult to achieve that. That's it. That's the policy. I mean, if I were to really summarize it. Of course, I mean, there are many more nuances which I'm not getting into. Next, just a couple of other things which I've heard again and again. So I want to sort of just highlight those. One is, well, you're saying all of this, but look at the reality. There's a finance bill, the relationship in the region. Look at the situation in Afghanistan. Investment is not coming. Blah blah blah. So let me just say this much. If a policy that is directional in nature and says where this country wants to go or any country wants to go is only going to focus on reality today, you don't need a policy. You just need to write down what the reality is. The whole point is that we are learning from where we have been and where we are, and we are saying where we want to go. So clearly, it is not depicting what the situation is today. There are many positives. There are some challenges in the situation today. We are explaining where we want to go and how we want to convert the challenges into opportunities and cash in on the opportunities that we have. What's wrong with that? So I don't quite understand this conversation about, but things are different on the ground. Of course, they're different on the ground. And we are saying we have to go somewhere else. Here is the path that we want to take. Yes, that's it. That's what a directional policy does. So yes, it is aspirational in some respects. And now the million-dollar question is, okay, you've said you want to go in this direction. How do you get there? So we are in a very suboptimal situation right now. We've got a western border where two countries are internationally sanctioned. There's an eastern border where the relationship is broken. And yes, so it is suboptimal. And that is why we have to find ways to bring it as close to a situation as possible where we can achieve our vision. All of it is not in our control. We are not responsible for or able to change what is happening to our east. It's a decision that sovereign country has taken. And maybe so, we are unable to do what we need to do on the Eastern Front till things improve. But then we look for other avenues. The genius of policy is not to have all resources and apply those. The genius of policy is to find your way out of a very constrained environment. And perhaps that's where we are, right? So reality and aspiration, I think it's a needless debate, frankly. We are not saying it's the reality today. That's where the country wants to go. The how to get there is the critical part. And there, I think you've mentioned that people are saying you don't say which ministry, which province and how. So I'll repeat one more time, and I hope this gets registered. I've said it everywhere I've gone, that the public document contains none of that, but we have an entire implementation framework and matrix attached at the very, very, very specific level on who has to do what in what time. And I've sort of talked about this again and again. In fact, I've also mentioned that the Prime Minister has instructed that the National Security Committee has to regularly report back on what has happened to those specific goals that have been laid down. And I'd asked for this policy document just to see whether we've missed something. But I just read out a sentence for you. Specific details and analyses of the security landscape, the country's vital national security interests, priority actions, and implementation framework have not been included in this document. That's it. Why? I mean, nowhere in the world do you declassify which ministry has to do what on what timeline, who they have to report to. I mean, that's irrelevant to the larger conversation, but we have that. Yes, it's a very difficult task. Yes, 100% achieving 100% may not be as simple as that. Yes, we have to work a lot on that. That's the goal. If we don't implement the policy, I mean, the policy is ultimately just a piece of paper. So the entire focus of my office, the entire system is going to be in that direction, right? So that's essentially, that's exactly how we are approaching this and moving forward. Finally, let me just say, because there's also been a discussion about, who owns the policy, how much consensus. From my perspective, the more debate on this policy, the better. It really doesn't matter whether people are critiquing it, supporting it, as long as there is a healthy debate telling us, here is what you can do this in this way, do this better, you haven't done this right. All welcome. This is a start. It's going to be an evolving document. It's dynamic. It's not set in stone. We have an annual review built into it. We've built in a review anytime a new government comes in. Guide us. That's exactly the point. There is a system-wide consensus of where we want to go. Now it is the right of every citizen, of every institution, of course the parliament, to guide us. So whatever that is, we'll absorb and we'll take it forward based on that guidance. To end, let me just say, I actually am very pleased myself. And I've said this to people, that just having this policy is of value. Even if you say 0% implementation, the fact that we have a consensus on a direction. I don't think you would have had a seminar on national security where one of the areas, if not the area of focus, is climate change, right? You wouldn't have had this before. I mean, I've been called to talk about poverty alleviation as a security issue, etc. This is a change. let's spend 90% of our time talking about these issues, because if we don't resolve these issues, everything else is immaterial at the end of the day. So I'm very glad and very grateful, Ambassador Saab, and to you, Madam, for doing this. Debate it, critique us, tear it down, but at the end of it, please put down 5 lines to say this is how we should improve, because that's really what we will then benefit from. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Mueed Yusuf, for making it and joining us in this conversation, and also for setting the tone for the panel discussion that will follow. Since Dr. Mueed Yusuf has very little time and he has to leave shortly, I'll open the floor for a few, but very few question and answers directed only at him. So please feel free to take this conversation further. And may I please request, keep your question brief and focused on the thematic area. Thank you.
Very much, sir, for being here. My name is Muslim bin Akhil, and I'm an admitted maritime scholar. Sir, we have highlighted very important things. This is about the geoeconomics, geostrategy, and the prime focus of the national security policy is geoeconomics. So, Gawada and so how do you see the role of maritime trades and maritime security that is conducting 95% of the world trade can benefit the economics of Pakistan? What are we doing for the maritime sector, sir? Thank you.
Again, number one, let me also explain. This policy is not going to supplant functions of the government. So the Maritime Ministry actually is the lead on that. They are pursuing this and they will continue to do that. If you ask my personal view, it's virgin territory, frankly. I mean, there is so much potential in the blue economy in Pakistan, which is untapped. I mean, we're nowhere near exploring and exploiting it the way we could. I know there is you talk about implementation. One of the things laid out is we don't have a dedicated maritime policy. So if you don't know what you want to do, that's one of the things I know the maritime minister is very passionately following and will come soon. And that will have its sort of priorities and how we want to achieve it. It's not only Gwadar, our entire coast. I mean, there is so much there, which frankly we haven't done. Then the commercial aspect of the blue economy, I don't think we've tapped into so much. So there's a lot of potential there that we need to capture. Every time people tell me Pakistan has 4 neighbors, and one is, I always tell people actually we have 5 neighbors, and the most promising one is probably the sea, and we need to figure out how to do better there.
Assalamu alaikum, Mueed sir. My name is Faridullah Khan. I'm a retired federal secretary. I was wondering, आपने बात की कि पॉलिसी और स्ट्रेटेजी में कुछ फासला होता है. This is a policy, this is not a strategy. तो जहन में ख्याल आया कि हमारी जो इस्लामी शरीयत है वो on account of very proactive ijtihad also has not developed with times. तो क्या ijtihad की जो provision है theoretically in order to make the Islamic culture, Islamic laws contemporary and relevant to the contemporary world, क्या इस पॉलिसी में ऐसी ब्रिजिंग अरेंजमेंट्स हैं? आपने कुछ इशारतन बात की कि द नेक्स्ट गवर्नमेंट के लिए भी गुंजाइश है फॉर डिस्कशन. तो वो ब्रिजिंग जो है दैट इज वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट फ्रॉम पॉलिसी टू स्ट्रेटेजी एंड आल्सो फॉर मेकिंग इट वाइब्रेंट एंड सेल्फ सस्टेनिंग.
सर पहले पार्ट पे तो नहीं है. आई थिंक दैट्स अ डीपर डिस्कशन. ऑफ कोर्स द कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन अल्टीमेटली टेक्स प्रेसिडेंस एंड प्रायोरिटी ओवर एवरीथिंग. ये जो आपका दूसरा पॉइंट है, अगर मैं समझ सका हूँ, पॉलिसी कंटिन्यूटी का जो इशू है, that is very much part of it, because I think one of our weaknesses is historically reversals of policies, and so that is very much there. एक ये review डालने का मकसद ये था, so that there's ownership. दूसरा फ्रेंकली हमने तो इसमें ये भी प्रपोज किया है कि देयर नीड्स टू बी ए सर्टेन एग्रीमेंट ऑन एरियाज ऑफ नेशनल सिक्योरिटी व्हिच आर अबव एनी पॉलिटिकल डिफरेंसेस। ऑफ कोर्स वो पार्लियामेंट में ही लीड करना है, वहां से होना है। सो मेरा कंसिडर्ड व्यू ये है कि अगर इस पे डिबेट होगी पार्लियामेंट की, बाहर पार्लियामेंट से ओनरशिप बढ़ेगी तो ये कंटिन्यू करेगी। बिकॉज व्हाट आई कैन गारंटी यू, हैविंग टॉक टू एवरीबडी इवन इफ इनफॉर्मली, no political actor is opposed to anything about the direction in this policy. So उस पे कोई डिबेट नहीं है। अब डिबेट ये है कि इसको इम्प्लीमेंट कैसे करना है। उसमें फ्रेंकली जो भी गवर्नमेंट ऑफ द टाइम हो उनका राइट होना चाहिए टू डिसाइड दैट वी वांट टू प्रायोरिटाइज दिस थिंग एंड नॉट दैट थिंग, वो इसके अंदर प्रोविजन है। आप दुआ करें कि ना हो।
Saeed Ahmad Reid. I am from NIPS QAU. I have a question about butter plus guns issue. I mean, that has been the problem here. Like, as you know, the priority, the question of priority, whether we prioritize butter at the cost of gun, I mean, which has been the case in the past. So with this policy, I mean, we are deciding that we will be giving some preference to butter, at least not sacrificing it in future at the cost of.
आई थिंक आपकी फ्रेमिंग से मैं एग्री नहीं करता। इट इज नॉट एन इशू ऑफ के इन द पास्ट वी हैव प्रायोरिटाइज दिस और दैट। द वे पॉलिसीज आर डिसाइडेड, आप लोग मेरे से बहुत ज्यादा एक्सपीरियंस है, यहाँ वो लोग बैठे जिन्होंने अपनी सारी जिंदगी इसमें गुजारी है। आई हैवंट, आई एम अ नोविस। इट्स नॉट अबाउट कि मैंने इसको नहीं देने और इसको देने। व्हाट यू बेसिकली डू इज लुक एट योर थ्रेट एंड अपॉर्चुनिटीज मैट्रिक्स एंड यू डिसाइड व्हाट इज ए मोर important thing for the country to develop. Goal tab bhi butter hi hai. The question that policy makers ask is कि अगर मैंने X चीज को इतने resources ना दिए तो क्या मेरे पास वो space रहेगी करने की? And maybe the decisions were made to say कि unless I put in X amount of money to guns, I won't have a opportunity to do butter. Mindset हर दफा यही होता है। ये नहीं होता कि आप किसी से ले लेंगे। अभी भी अगर आपकी रिसोर्स पाई का साइज वही रहेगा जो आज है तो ये लड़ाई चलती है। बिकॉज आपके पास यू हैव 3 people who need money, हर एक को 10 रुपए चाहिए, पैसे आपके पास टोटल 10 है, तो ये बहस तो जारी रहेगी। सो द आइडिया इज टू फिक्स दैट 10 rupee kitty and make it 30 rupees so that you can give 10 to each if that's the demand. So I don't think, what I would want is the framing to change. It's not about versus, it is and. अब उसको किस तरह डिस्ट्रीब्यूट करना है। एक ये है कि जो अभी है उसी को डिस्ट्रीब्यूट करते रहे। क्लियरली वी हैवंट स्पेंट इनफ ऑन ह्यूमन सिक्योरिटी, इस पे तो कोई डिबेट नहीं। बट वो एडिशनल जो रिसोर्स पाए है वो कहाँ से आनी है? वो आपके उस इकोनॉमिक मॉडल से आनी है जो एक्सपोर्ट लेड होना है, जो एक्सपोर्ट ओरिएंटेड FDI लेड होना है, वगैरह वगैरह, वो सारे इकोनॉमिक पॉलिसी की स्पेस। दैट्स वेयर द पॉलिसी डायरेक्शन। I have 5 more minutes.
5 more minutes. So we take 2 more questions from the ladies in the back.
या आप कलेक्ट कर लें तो मैं जल्दी जल्दी सारों के जवाब दे दूं। If you want to collect, if you collect, I'll just answer quickly.
Assalamu alaikum, Moeed. Salma Malik, Qaid Azmi University. I know that the policy is only a month old and it's not a magic bullet by any chance. However, issues such as lynching, killing people on religious basis, and so many other aspects, plus women rights issues and minority issues, how does this policy cater to them? I know that is part of the implementation phase, but and we were part of the working group looking at gender-based issues. Yet there is somewhat less mention as much as we wanted there to be. My second question here is, would the reviews that you mentioned about be as inclusive as they were in the formative phase, having all type of stakeholders as part of the discussion? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And first of all, let me congratulate to advising national security policy. At least we are able to have national security policy for Pakistan today. Thank you. My question is regarding terrorism, like interior and exterior elements of terrorism in Pakistan. What part is actually addressing to deal with them? Secondly, blasphemy. How will you see that this national security policy can deal with such blasphemous acts plus terrorism, keeping a special courts in your view, because special courts are not working so expeditiously. Delay is always there. So how national security policy sees special courts working? Thank you.
Yes, go ahead. I think we'll make that the last question. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum. I'm Dr. Sayyid Mujahid Gilani, and I'm the nephew of two political prisoners currently lodged in Tihar jail, Sayyid Asya Andrabi and Dr. Qasim Faktu. So my question is, national security policy terms Kashmir as part of the vital security interest of Pakistan, which you have already mentioned and explained is something for which a country can actually go to a war. For once, this is a comprehensive national security policy as just mentioned. But on the other side, why do we look at some track to or back channel trade and other kind of relationships with India? Meanwhile, India has not even stepped back on the August 5th, 2019 illegal acts.
समा आपका क्वेश्चन ऑन एक तो जेंडर उतना नहीं जितना आप चाहते थे, लेकिन है तो सही, पहले कम से कम ये तो एक्नॉलेज करें. Look, I mean, I think lynching, terrorism, all of this is again the ills that we are dealing with in society. I'll just sum up the answer to both of your questions. We have a phrase in this which we lead with, which is unity in diversity. That says it all. You don't need to say anything more. Ke direction kya is policy ki and what would be under it. We have had various sort of aspects of debate on this issue for years and years. And there is a very simple phrase that we put in there, which is that societal strength and cohesion will come from unity and diversity. Ab uske liye kya karna hai? Minority, I mean, you can sort of list that down yourself. That's the direction. So yes, this is a problem we have to deal with. How? Uska ye, this is the direction that this policy is. In terms of reviews, I'm very grateful that you're saying that the formulation was inclusive, because the biggest critique so far is that we didn't include, enough people, which is true. When you do this kind of work, this started in 2014. At that time, the leadership of the National Security Division went city to city to talk to citizens on the ground, to get input on what they think is ultimately national security, what this policy should have. But let me be very candid. The utility of that effort maybe was mixed, because as a researcher, once you start getting redundancy in your responses, that you don't keep going, right? So yes, I mean, I say we talk to 600 people in 220 million. Clearly, that's nothing. But we've done the best we could given the environment. The yearly review is not an overhaul of the policy. That will only look at what has changed in the last year, what are things we need to incorporate, where we may have gotten better ideas, etc. So I don't think that will be an open-ended kind of process. It will be inclusive in the sense that what we hear between 1 month ago and 11 months from now, all of that will be absorbed, whether it's from these kind of sessions or parliament or wherever. The 5-year review, of course, then that will be a new policy. As far as, again, the blasphemy point and terrorism, I think the answer is the same. When I say unity and diversity, you know exactly where we are going with this in terms of ensuring how these issues can be managed. That's basically what I would say. Sorry, I forgot. I apologize. Forgetting that could cost me my job. Okay, word you can't. Okay. We won't resolve this issue sitting here. And there are all sorts of views on this. If your argument is that India has not gone back on August 5th, so for the rest of eternity, we should just forget this conversation. That's an approach. We can take that approach. The goal of the state of Pakistan is to ensure that Kashmiris get the right to self-determination. That's the goal, right? Okay. Let's assume, hypothetically, let's assume today India comes and says we want to hold a genuine plebiscite. What do you think I want to say to that? No, sorry. I don't like you. I don't want to talk to you. So the point is, there is no conversation going on right now. There is not an iota of doubt in the mind of any Pakistani decision maker on what our position on Kashmir is, which is United Nations Security Council resolution. There is no question. I mean, media can say words and conspiracies and whatever. The Prime Minister has been crystal clear that there can be no dialogue on anything else. We can't change the calculus unless August 5th is revisited. That's also clear. I will repeat so that this is not misquoted. There is no conversation that you don't know of that may be happening or anything. But don't taboo conversation in a way that even if I get the opportunity to get Kashmiris what they deserve, I say, no, sorry, I will not have this one. Just keep that in mind. But there is no question about Pakistan's position, Pakistan's commitment, United Nations Security Council resolution. It's not Pakistan, by the way. It's the international community that guaranteed Kashmiris this right. We are only advocating that right because we are part of that dispute. Right? If the world wants to close their eyes to international law obligations, to what is happening in IIOJK, to the genocidal acts that are happening every day, then this is at their own peril at the end of it. But it cannot stop Pakistan from standing up for Kashmiris, for committing, for pushing. And inshallah, you know, it won't happen today, it may not happen tomorrow, but it will happen. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Well, now it's our turn for the panel discussion. So, Assalamu alaikum, good morning, and a very warm welcome to our distinguished panelists and the audience as well. I think Dr. Mueed Yusuf has contextualized the national security policy in his keynote. So we will take that conversation forward. As he reiterated, this policy has attracted a lot of attention. It has also been the subject of debate and commentaries, both in the print and the electronic media. So today we have with us three distinguished panelists who will share their perspective with us. I'm sorry, Ms. Naseem Zehra could not join us because there's, I think, a likely case of COVID in her house, so she preferred to stay away from this session. So, Senator Mushahed, I'm going to start with you. As Dr. Mueed had said, that the national security policy is an all-encompassing document. Do you think that, you know, it has comprehensively covered all the traditional and non-traditional aspects? But more importantly, what I want to hear from you is, do you see any serious constraints that policy makers might face in actually achieving the stated goals and objectives?
Thank you very much, Aisha, and thank you to the Institute of Regional Studies and our colleagues for organizing this initiative. I think the one key point that Mueed made was that national security policy has been a work in progress for the last 7-8 years, and it has evolved over time. And let me add to that, he mentioned the date 2014, because that's when the National Action Plan started. I'd just like to go back a little bit. In 2012, when I was chairing the Senate Defense Committee, we were the first in the parliament to formulate what are some of the serious non-military security threats to Pakistan. And it's documented in a public hearing. We listed 4: climate change, cybersecurity, anti-Pakistan propaganda, and this is before we discovered this from lab in Brussels, and ethnic and sectarian fault lines. Now, the key question that you have asked is, what are the impediments? The biggest impediment in Pakistan is that a conceptual framework has been provided. It's overarching. The implementation part is the tricky part because we are very poor in that. And I think that for Pakistan, the issue of climate change is paramount because at least some of us discovered it when in 2010, the floods that hit Pakistan. I think no other country faced that kind of damage. 20% of Pakistan damage in all four provinces. 20 million Pakistanis dislocated or affected. 1.4 million houses destroyed and damaged. And the total damage was what? Almost $10 billion. So that was when everybody started focusing on this issue. And you were there also, and I was there, and I think we, Shafqa Saab said, COP26 maybe. This was a major one. But we have seen that not just in Pakistan, but internationally also, the commitments that were made in COP21 in Paris were not kept, especially on climate change. So the key issue is, I would say, clarity of goal. They always say in English that there's a difference between what is urgent and what is important. And I think that we have this and the execution in a very sort of a focused manner, as I say, get cracking and get it done. I think that is the key challenge with the policy.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Then, taking the cue from what
Thank you very much, ma'am. It is interesting to note that once there was no policy in this book form, of course, Pakistan was not running without policies. We had the policies and especially downstream policies. There was not much of criticism asking the government that why this policy is not there. But once it is there, there's a lot of criticism. Anyways, as long as it is there, I think it is good. Now, what this policy is and what it is not. If you allow me, I would like to show 2-3 slides to clarify my point. The screen is off. Now, if you look at this, I will read it out. National security policy is a framework. So, सबसे पहली important चीज तो ये कि it is a framework for describing how a country provides security for the state and its citizens and is often presented as an integrated document. अब ये security का थोड़ा सा problem हो जाता है. I in fact suggested to Mohit Yusuf साहब कि why shouldn't we call it comprehensive national policy and just take out the word security, because most of the people, I mean, of course, those who are learned, they do understand the expanded meaning of security and what does it mean. But many people think that the moment security is inserted, it means military, which it is not. But anyway, so next, इसका दिखाना जरा. इससे भी आगे चले जाएं. Now this is NDU definition. लोग समझते हैं कि फौजियों को नहीं पता, वो समझते हैं कि सिक्योरिटी सिर्फ तोपें और बंदूक होते हैं. This is what is being taught at NDU. The national security and welfare policy provides a unified concept to a nation's foreign, economic, defense, and all domestic policies to operate within one larger framework. Again, the word framework. Therefore, the goals that any nation sets to safeguard its interests must be consistent with national aspirations as well as available means. ये important है कि आपको, whenever you are making a policy, you must be aware of the national aspirations where the people want, because they also have, they have their own thinking and available means, of course. यहाँ पर तो इसको मैं रोकता हूँ. अभी वो दिखाइए वो next जो है. Now, if we look at it, the hierarchy of policies and strategies, and where this national policy is placed, we will find it is just below your constitution. ये जो pubs और कुछ ऐसे interests हैं which are mentioned in the constitution, and then comes your national policy, and then there are downstream policies, defense policy and foreign policy and all this. Actually, these downstream policies are the ones on which more questions are being asked once we are talking about this policy. Ma'am, what you were asking that how, in what details this policy should go, whether implementation is a part of this policy. We all understand, I mean, those who are aware of it, strategy, some of the, countries, they do issue national policy and strategy. And I think National Security Advisor mentioned this thing that some portions of strategy are there in the portion which has not been made public. So maybe that is there. But it is not within the mandate of national policy to actually lay down each and every nitty-gritty that how the thing would be done. So I think that this criticism is not in place, is not valid. That why this policy is not giving exact things. Yes, of course, as we go along, I also feel that there are certain gaps which should have been filled as far as this policy is concerned. But generally speaking, I think we must appreciate it as a first step, that it has come as a document. Of course, the more important and demanding thing would be that because the National Security Advisor has taken upon himself to also monitor and get a feedback that how this policy is being implemented, that is going to be a very demanding task. Those of us who have been in the government and those who know that how the ministries, how much they listen to, National Security Advisor and NSD, let us see how it goes. So I would say whatever has been presented, whatever has come is a good document. It has got, of course, room for improvement, but expecting it to strategize all these things, the aims and objectives, that probably was not a part of this. So,
water change in dealing with the climate change issue, I can only welcome the references to climate change, which are in the context and in the chapter dealing with human security. I think for the first time, we have a national document of this nature, of this caliber, which identifies, which recognizes the vital role of climate change, and takes cognizance of the profound and multifaceted impacts of climate change on Pakistan, as well as the need for efforts to deal with climate change. It's goes to the credit of those who wrote the policy that the policy correctly, accurately identifies the sectors which will be affected by climate change. Because the impacts of climate change affect different sectors in different countries. In Pakistan, we are an agricultural country. We are an arid or hyper-arid country, but so our agriculture depends critically on water. Water, in any case, is essential for all manifestations of human security. Now, the impact of climate change, if you take all the impacts of climate change, they will be evidenced by the water sector. So the climate change policy recognizes that and talks about the glaciers, talks about the monsoon, talks about the problems that water scarcity. We already are a water scarce country with 900 cubic meters per capita availability of water. The other thing is the disaster, as Shahid mentioned, the 2010, what were called biblical floods, whose impacts actually have not been mitigated to this day. Some of the schools have not been rebuilt. Some of the hospitals have not been rebuilt, some of the infrastructure. So as far as I'm concerned, I'm absolutely satisfied with the references to climate change. They exact the areas which will be affected by climate change in Pakistan have been identified, and I have no problem. Where I have a problem with this policy document is that some of the significant milestones in policy measures and institutional arrangements have not been mentioned. We had an amazing, a remarkable climate law in 2017, which fixed the institutional system for dealing with climate change. Now, normally you would not expect a document of this nature, which is more normative, which outlines the principles and the key issues, to talk about implementation. But in a country like Pakistan, which has become a graveyard of unimplemented strategies and policies, you do need some indication of how a new multi-dimensional challenge is going to be addressed. So we had that remarkable document. The other thing is now water is identified as an important issue. We have a national water policy, which was a remarkable achievement of the previous government, that they secured the approval of all the provinces and adopted this water policy. Now, there is no mention of water policy by this government. And a number of initiatives and urgent tasks for water security, which is actually your health security, your energy security, and your economic security, have remained unimplemented, those initiatives. So I think I have no problem with the way climate change has been dealt with, but I have serious issues with the failure of the party of this policy to recognize those developments.
Thanks, Shafkat. Thanks. Since, we've been part of formulating that document on climate change and national security, maybe we can have another discussion that is exclusively dedicated to climate change, water, and national security, because that, of course, as you've highlighted, is one of the critical sectors which the policy identifies as the core for human security. But coming back to you, Senator Mushaid, Dr. Mueed had also said that, a policy is as robust or as ineffective as the state's ability to take it forward. If it cannot implement, it will just sit on the shelf and gather dust. So how effective do you think is the capability of the government to take it forward? Because the main element here is collective ownership across the political spectrum. So do you think it will have the buy-in from all the relevant stakeholders to achieve its objective?
Asha, the crucial word you asked in your question was collective ownership. And I would sort of operationally define it in this context as political ownership, which means ownership by the parliament, which represents the people of Pakistan. And I was the first in the parliament as chairman of the defense committee to invite Dr. Mueed to give us a briefing. And he came, and the session was in camera, but we had a comprehensive, and he shared before it's launched also. But I think that a more broad-based, more inclusive, more transparent approach is needed. What are the clarity in terms of contours? And I think the question which is asked by Dr. Mujahid Gilani is also operational because he's from Kashmir. And that issue is extremely important. And as Shafqat also mentioned, for example, one of the major issues that is going to hit this country, apart from population, is the water in scarcity. And we have a water policy by consensus. And already you can see one of the most contentious political issues in Pakistan today is what? Kalabag Dam. So when it affects national harmony, obviously that's a security issue also. So I think that there has to be, so number one, clarity. And then secondly, the political ownership. And third, then you have a framework. You see, in our state, when we take a decision and we want to go through with it, we have succeeded. I'll give you two examples. Because there was a general consensus within the system, within the state, within the people. The nuclear program. Started by Mr. Bhutto, completed by Mr. Nawaz Sharif, continued by General Ziaullah, continued by Madam Benazir Bhutto Sahiba. So all across 24 years. CPAC, again, and it's continuing because this is a national strategic objective above party lines. So I think the national security policy should be also treated as such because it's about national security, security of our people, our country, and our society.
And will it be debated in Parliament?
Well, we have sought that debate. It's not yet there. I think, and Moiz is on the right track. He has offered that I'm willing to come and do that. So we have asked the Speaker and the Chairman of the Senate to do that. I think that is called for, and that is how it will be. We can take it forward. Okay. So I think the political ownership should be there. It's not something that this policy is this government policy. We're talking about the state.
You're talking about the longevity, the continuity of the policy.
Because governments come and go, but the state and society, they have to have a buy-in, and that is only through the parliament.
Thanks. Thanks. Generally, you had mentioned that, you have certain reservations or gaps about the policy. So I'd like you to comment on that. But beyond that, I just wanted to also mention that the traditional threat to our security has always been seen as coming from India. Now, this is the first national security policy, the formal articulation of our policy. Of course, we've been in existence for 75 years. That doesn't mean that we didn't have a strategy or a policy on how to defend our borders or have internal security. So what value addition does this policy bring? And is there anything in this policy that indicates a shift in stance?
Thank you very much. First, to just share with the audience that the gaps that I feel there in the policy. For example, once you talk of population, we know that population is a big problem. It has been mentioned in the policy that the present rate of increase of population is I think 2.8 or 2.4, 2.4. But then this is just a fact that this is the rate of population. Once you say, if you give a policy, I think at least two things should have been mentioned. One, that where do we want to go? We want to reduce this population rate to 1.5, let us say, and in what time? This could have been given there. Just one observation. Secondly, for example, once we talk of Kashmir, it says that we will carry out all the peaceful means to resolve the Kashmir issue. Now, whenever you talk of international relations and such issues, it is always an interactive thing. And it will partially also cover the second part which you had asked about India. We can remain peaceful as long as India is peaceful while dealing with Kashmir. If India brings 900,000 troops in Kashmir, it has not been peaceful. So if we remain peaceful, and whatever India does to Kashmir, then there's a problem in the policy. My take, I may be wrong. So in fact, we must keep the door open. Policies should be such that they should not, block any avenue. So here it blocks that. Once it says that we will only have peaceful means. About Afghanistan, for example, it says, and rightly so, that we will go along with the international thinking about Afghanistan. But what if there is a split in the international thinking, if those who are away from Afghanistan and not, their interests are not deeply ingrained in Afghanistan, they will have some other thinking, and those regional players and those who are more interested, they will have a different thing. So you can't say just this sentence is not enough, that we will just toe the line, whatever the international, thinking is. So just two, three, there might be others also, but I was of the view that some timeline should be given and some direction wherever it is missing, and the avenues must be left open so that we can, the strategies can work. Do not try to limit the strategies. As far as the India-Pakistan relationship is concerned and what this policy actually India-Pakistan relationship is such that it gives a lot of limitation, puts a lot of limitation on the policymakers because of the aspiration of the people of Pakistan. That is one problem. As the NSA was trying to, I think he succeeded also in trying to answer the question that can we go and talk to them and have trade with them. I think the gentleman was not hinting at talking to India. He was probably hinting on trade and such like things. So yes, whereas we agree in Pakistan that we will not wait for the Kashmir issue to be resolved and then start talking or then start trading. We can always do that, but at least stop the atrocities which are going on, the genocide track on which India is going. So I think there we were right in asking that if you want to have trade, you cannot have trade start. You cannot start having trade with India while the women are being raped and people are being martyred. So at least there has to be a minimum condition. As far as India-Pakistan relationship is concerned, India is a larger country. India is a bigger economy, a stronger country. So again, I would say it is interactive in nature. It depends more on India that how they want to deal with us rather than us. We are normally, we have no option but to react the way Indians treat us. So I don't think this policy has anything new in it. It only gives, once it says that geoeconomy will be more important than geopolitics, but then a lot of flack came, and then I think adjustment has been made as far as I understand that no, geopolitics is also there in place. So that probably was one attempt to convince the people who are to act on it, whatever, that we may at times compromise some of our interests, which are not very vital, maybe for some economic gain, but probably that for the time being cannot happen. That is my take.
Shafqat, I'll come to you because other than being a climate expert, you have served for 35 years as a Foreign Office diplomat. So we're talking here about relationship with the eastern border. We're talking about trade a little bit. So let me take that thought forward and see that the policy talks about, the shift from geopolitical to geoeconomic. At some level, the two are interlinked. So if we talk about, social stability and economic well-being, and we're looking towards trade in the neighborhood, do you think that will require a strategic shift in our thinking? And what could be the possible entry points for promoting economic integration in South Asia?
Yes. The policy actually not only talks about the need for shift from geopolitical to economic, it also has a number of references, imperative of promoting regional connectivity. Doesn't talk about regional integration or anything. Now we have to make up our minds about the question of trade. There have been a number of studies on how trade with India would impact Pakistan. And but unless and until we define our position clearly about our willingness or otherwise to trade with India while our political problem remains unresolved. As long as we don't resolve this issue, then all this talk of regional connectivity and shift to geoeconomics. What is geoeconomics if you don't trade with your neighbor? I mean, you cut yourself off from your neighborhood and you continue to talk about connectivity and all that. We have to make up our mind about our willingness to enter into trade. Take climate change for instance. Now, one of the greatest impediments in promoting renewable energy in Pakistan is that we don't produce any of this equipment. We don't produce solar panels, we don't produce batteries, we don't produce the turbines for wind energy, for which we have tremendous potential in the wind corridor and say about 25,000 megawatts. India produces all we can deliver it. Epidemic control, we could not produce a single vaccine. We were lucky that we had China, which provided the bulk of initial vaccination. But in India, it took them just a couple of weeks to produce. They already are actually the biggest manufacturer of vaccines in the world. This institute, factory in Patna, so we have to make up our minds about that. We have to do the economics. I don't think our economy will suffer because of trade. In any case, in any trade arrangement, you always have a problem that if your national interests are affected, you immediately you can go to Brexit. Even in the WTO rules and all free trade arrangements, the possibility of putting the brakes is always recognized.
Senator Musharraf, I'll come back. I'll come to you now because Ambassador Shafqat Kaka has highlighted a lot of areas where collaboration is possible. So the political considerations of come into play. So can you kind of comment a little bit on that to say that political considerations have always been or have played an important role in framing the national security agenda. So if we want to actually pursue this shift from geopolitical to geoeconomic, what is the strategic shift in our thinking that we need to bring in, and how do we need to do things differently? Where is it possible for us to do things differently?
First of all, regarding, let's take the low-hanging fruit, climate change. I've been advocating a regional approach on climate change that, for example, South Asia, the region where we are located, 1/5 of humanity resides here. You had 10 years ago, the cabinet of Maldives having a meeting underwater because of global warming. You had the cabinet of Nepal having a meeting in the Himalayan mountains because of melting of the glacier. And you have 500 million people living on the coastal lines of Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka. So these are things. And we had also proposed the past, let's take Siachen clash. Demilitarization, followed by establishment and the Japanese proposal, a peace park where there can be mountain tourism and expeditions, and a joint Pakistan-India approach to preserving and protecting that environment and ecology of the Siachen Glacier. Because, that is something. But I'm sorry to say the issue is at that end. And I was recently reading this book by the former Indian Foreign Secretary, Shyam Saran, a very distinguished Indian diplomat, how India views the world. And he mentions, and this was the time of General Musharraf, when for the first time Pakistan was willing to even go back on the UN resolutions. But there was on that issue also no reciprocity. And according to Shyam Saran Saab, it was scuttled by the Indian Army Chief, General J.J. Singh, and National Security Advisor Narayana. So Yes. So you see, there is an establishment in India also, which is very hawkish. Example number two. Last year, we were given a briefing and journalists were given briefings that, oh, in the back channel, India is now willing to discuss Kashmir also. And it was the LOC, it led to the LOC ceasefire, if you remember, in February 2021. And when they discussed with me, I said, the Indians are using that as a decoy because they've got a pressure from China twice over. In Galwan in June 2020, in January 2021. Now they suddenly want to talk to Pakistan, but we were told they will even discuss Kashmir. Because, you know, you can't have Hamlet without the Prince of Denmark. You can't have a normalization without settling of Kashmir. And I think there's a moral issue also, another responsibility. Yes, we can have low-hanging fruit, cricket, culture, and commerce. But now at this stage, they are even willing to lose a cricket match to spite Pakistan in the World Cup. So I think the problem is more than India. I see the problem is with the Modi regime. It has an ideological foreign policy. Probably for the first time in Indian history, they want to transform the Indian state, and their Pakistan policy is an expression of the domestic Hindutva policy, which garners them votes. In Pakistan, since 1990, in the last 7 elections, India has not been an issue in our domestic politics. After achieving the nuclear test, we are quite comfortable in dealing with that. But for India, Pakistan bashing sells. In Pakistan, India bashing doesn't sell. So I think that there has to be that kind of reciprocity. We are open to that. In fact, just last week, I was at a webinar in Delhi, and I had contributed a chapter on a book by Mr. O.P. Shah, who is a peace activist, on how we can improve India-Pakistan relations. So my basic point was, more than anything else, the Indians should have a bigger heart, dealing not just with Pakistan, with Nepal, Bangladesh, other countries, because the attitude is of that. So I think the problem lies at that end, but I would still support a regional initiative on climate change, because this is the common threat. Climate change has no borders. And as you know, whenever there's the winter season, what the burning of crops in India has an impact in Lahore also, and vice versa. So I think that we can still take those initiatives, but we should not be starry-eyed about that. Here we were told that there'll be an east-west corridor. I think those grandiose schemes should not be there. Let's try to get what we can achieve. And I would say on climate change, take a regional initiative. We should reaffirm on Siachen also, because I think that is, frankly, doesn't affect our national security in terms of military as such. And hopefully we will have some reciprocity from the Indian side. But also I would say that since you are representing the civil society coalition, India is not just Modi or RSS or BJP. India is a big country, a diverse country, a civilization with a lot of people. And I think the outreach to the Indian political forces, civil society, and others there. If Arundhati Roy can speak up on the Modi's fascism, the others also are speaking up on that. And we should have that outreach. Government to government, there are limited possibilities, but we should keep trying on that.
Thank you. I think Shaptak wants to make a comment.
I thought I'll mention in the context of the impacts of climate change. You know, one of my constant worries is a certain lacuna in the Indus Water Treaty. So the Indus Water Treaty carried out a neat surgical operation, dividing, for the first time in history, rivers were divided rather than shared. But there was this possibility that there were 6 major rivers of the Indus basin, and the negotiators found it possible with certain additional safeguards for Pakistan to neatly divide the rivers. Now, the quantities of water which Pakistan and India are entitled are not met. Rivers are met. Now, the worry is that if, as a result of climate change induced droughts there is a reduction in the flow of water. How do we deal with that reduction? Because we keep monitoring when the rivers enter Pakistan and Azad Kashmir. We always make sure how much water we have received. Now, if there is a significant reduction in the flow of water, how do we deal with that? There is no mechanism in the treaty. I think luckily, in spite of the problems that Modi has created, the Indus Water Treaty has remained intact. Indus Water Treaty has demonstrated its extraordinary resilience to the vicissitudes of Indo-Pak relations, and the commissioners have been meeting. We should push for a dialogue with India on working out the modality of addressing the seasonal, hopefully seasonal, shortages in water because of climate change or other considerations. So this, I think, by the way, I admire the national security policy for recognizing the importance of continued access and adequate access to transboundary river waters as an imperative of national security. For the first time that we have recognized, because 80% of our water comes in rivers that originate outside our borders.
Yeah.
So our continued access to those waters is an imperative of our national security.
Thank you, Shafter. Jan Lodhi, Ambassador Kalka has mentioned about, water sharing, transboundary, and, similar thematic areas concerned with climate change. So let me pose the last question to you. Years ago, when alarms were sounded that future wars will not be over oil, but over water, they were dismissed as alarmists. But now, when we look at the climate change scenario, it has upended the water availability, and now research shows that conflicts among communities and across borders will increase as a result of water shortage. So given the fact that we are a single basin, lower riparian, reliant on transboundary water, how do you see this playing out in the future? How will it affect our national security, especially given Afghanistan and India as our two neighbors and upper riparian? And what steps can Pakistan take to secure its water security?
Thank you very much. Not only this, the factor that you mentioned, add to it one more factor that I think several times Indian leadership has mentioned this thing, that, for example, they say blood and water cannot flow together, which means that, you can stop this water, which is alarming. So I think for this, the first thing that we'll have to do is, and that is, reinforcing the international consensus on this and going to international fora that even this threat should not be mentioned. Even a talk of this thing should not be there, that we will stop waters or something, because of course, once we had this Indus Basin Treaty, and you must be knowing it better, sir, at that time, this international treaty on trans-frontier distribution of water was not there. It came later on. And that is why we had to resort to this sort of thing, that instead of, distributing water of each river, the rivers were distributed. I think it was good for us, because the upper riparian otherwise would have the opportunity to control all the 5 rivers. Now they can only. So 2 things will have to be done. One, that we'll have to resort to international fora, and we must do it in a preventive manner, going to them that this is one thing which should not be mentioned. And secondly, in our strategy, we'll have to inbuild this thing, that in case of any upper riparian, I'm basically talking of India, if they try to stop our legitimate waters, then we also have a right to react in some other way. That thing should be very clearly mentioned. This is my view, because unless if you keep quiet on this, it might happen one day. The way their aggressive designs are there, they can use water as a weapon against us. So these 2 things which come to my mind, that we must create a deterrence, that this would be an act of war in a way, and we will react in whatever way we think is feasible. And secondly, we must sensitize the international community in advance that such threats should not emanate.
Thank you, thank you. And with that, we come to the end of this session. I want to thank our eminent panelists for their time and insightful comments, and I'll open the floor for the questions.
अस्सलाम वालेकुम। मेरा नाम मुनीर अहमद है और मुशाहिद साहब, सेनेटर मुशाहिद साहब से I want to ask one question. That we have been reading a lot of observations on the national security policy in the context of in managing internal conflicts, and there is no clear stance of the government that how the internal dissenting voices will be dealt with, and most of the dissenting voices are the victims of war on terrorism in collateral damage. What do you say, sir, if the national security policy addresses it?
In China, before Chairman Mao launched the Cultural Revolution, he had launched a campaign that let 100 flowers bloom, let 100 schools of thought contend. I think in any democracy, the strength of that, and especially in a federation like Pakistan, is diversity. And I would differentiate between dissension, which is part and essence of democracy, from the so-called war on terror, which we had to face in the last 20 years, because that was partly a fallout of a regional approach and partly a consequence of internally generated extremism. So when we talk of dissension, I think if there's a dissent from the so-called conventional wisdom, that should be debated and discussed. In 1964, I'll give you an example of India. In 1964, there was a party which was launched in Madras, which was called the DMK. And it was actually a Tamil separatist party. They wanted a separate independent state of Tamil. Ilam, they used to call it, which is later on Sri Lanka had the same problem. It was dealt politically. They were brought into the mainstream of elections. And now they are very much embedded in the Indian political system as part of coalition partners of the major parties. So I think that dealing with dissension, there is no clarity on that, because when we talk about transition from geopolitics to geoeconomics, there's another transition which is concurrent. From being a national security state to a state which is a welfare state, which incorporates geoeconomics. And we are already embarked on geoeconomics through CPEC. What is geoeconomics? It's regional economic connectivity, economy, energy, ports, pipelines, roads, railways. And we are already at the hub of that. And in fact, we have invited India also to be part of that, because barring India, all the other countries are there. South Asian countries, Iran, Afghanistan, Central Asian countries like Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, and Uzbekistan. So I think that transition from being a national security state has also to be concurrent. And in that, dissenting voices are part of the 100 flowers blooming in the country, and they cannot be stifled through use of force. And I think we are lucky that Pakistan, we have the photograph of the Qaeda-e-Azam, we are a product of the democratic process. We are not an Arab country or a Middle Eastern country where there's suffocation of that kind. It's a very vibrant, democratic, political culture, a culture of resistance, even culture of standing up for what you believe in. So I think that is in that tradition that we should take it forward. But as other colleagues mentioned, there are missing gaps in the national security policy, and it has to be fine-tuned. So it's most of a conceptual aspect, but the clarity is needed in the concrete areas. Like you mentioned, I think General Lodi gave very good examples of Kashmir and also India policy and Afghanistan policy. How do we, that now the international community says, don't recognize, let the regional countries decide. But in Oslo, they have a meeting on 23rd, 24th, 25th January. A special plane is sent by the Norwegian government to pick up the Taliban delegation, and the Americans quietly lift the sanctions against the Haqqani network and the Afghan Taliban on humanitarian issues, which is good. But you see, the question is now they're dealing, and then suddenly we have the Kabul Doha flights being resumed. So it's a de facto, in my view, recognition of the Taliban regime by the West. So I think we have to determine our own interests and our own policy. And in fact, that's what I tell our Indian friends also. Don't be a camp follower of the Americans in the new Cold War against China. You are an Asian country. Be part of the Asian century and work together with Pakistan and the country to build a new Asia, rather than being part of that linkage of a new Cold War, because that will not work, and Asian countries cannot afford that.
Yes, a word about this national cohesion, internal cohesion that we are talking about. At many times it has been repeated in this policy that finding strength in diversity, and what Senator was also saying. I'm also of the view that we should also not give up the unifying factors. We must keep in mind the unifying, for example, the national language. Whereas, yes, all provinces should be allowed to teach their own languages, but national language should still remain, compulsory. Similarly, if you have some national dress code or national anthem or national flag, these things should never be compromised. So the unifying factors must be strengthened so that internal cohesion keeps strengthening. And of course, then the diversity can also be allowed, and it should be.
That, with your permission, Madam Chairperson, that in the Parliament, I oppose the formation of new provinces on the basis of ethnicity or linguistics. That's not what we need. We need good governance. We need to strengthen our provinces which exist under the Constitution, and also, more importantly, have devolution down below to the district and division level. Not create new provinces on the basis of ethnicity and linguistics, because that will be divisive. And I think the unifying factors are equally strong. Thank you.
Do we have the mic here? Who has, where? Can you give it to Ambassador? Okay, Ambassador Shah Jamal, I think.
Sir, I have two brief questions, one for Senator Mushahid and one for General Lodi sir. So we have been receiving lots of flack on this national security policy from the other side of the border. Shekhar Gupta says that it seems that Pakistan is crying on its knees that we are in economic pain. And there are other implications. But sir, I want your comment on the fact that we should have had a consensus document which should have been debated in the Parliament in detail. And I would like your comment as to what was the hurry and what you see behind it, that it was launched in such a hurry that we are not trying to generate consensus in the public instead of going to the Parliament, which is the right place. So my second question is to the General Lodi. So it was a pleasant surprise to see that you are getting away from the word security. I looked at your third slide also. So the concept of national security is not all encompassing. It is the national security which encompasses all. So if we had a policy, national policy 2125, 2150, it would not have given the impression that army is shoving something down the throat of this nation. So still there is a time if we wish to have a real policy which is encompassing and which is acceptable to all, for which we have to develop a consensus in the Parliament. I don't want to comment on the third slide more, because we already have a constitution in which vision is there, vital interests are there, and the critique on this policy is that it is very passive on the issue of Kashmir. Thanks.
Thank you. I think it's also in our DNA. We're always in a hurry to get things done. Normally we don't get it done on time, and then we suddenly wake up to it, oh, we must get cracking, and it should be done in a jiffy or overnight. And this has always been the case. But the important issue is, I would say, that the need for consensus, and consensus doesn't mean unanimity. It means incorporating different points of view. I would say that 80% of the document would not be a problem with any other government also. Because it's conceptually, you're talking of issues, how to resolve. There's no rocket science in that. The key issue is the I word, implementation. And also, I would say, a listing of the critical 5 or 6 goals which are crucial for resolving, in which Dr. Mujahid Gilani sir, please rest assured. There are 3 issues in Pakistan today: Kashmir, nuclear, and CPEC, on which there is a broad national consensus about Pakistan, and on which, irrespective of the government of the day, irrespective of Khaki or Mufti, or irrespective of any other problem, we are committed to that. So on that, there can be no reneging on that commitment. And I know people have been sending me emails from Kashmir also about the language and verbiage. वो सरकारी language जरा होती है उस किस्म की, so don't be. Our actions speak louder than words. We are very clear. We are the strongest voice on Kashmir, and on 5th we had this debate also. Regarding the criticism from India, I've seen, and as a media man, I've also been involved in track 2 with Indian friends in both Delhi and Islamabad. There's an obsession bordering on paranoia in the Indian state, in the Indian establishment, in the Indian media about Pakistan, which we do not actually have, not on our side. Even on gossip and other issues, they have programs and other things. We don't talk about those issues. So I think we are more confident. And I read this conference due to 2 factors. One, the nuclear factor. Once we became a nuclear power, we felt India cannot launch any war of aggression on Pakistan. So that gave a national self-confidence to the armed forces, to the state and society of Pakistan. And secondly, our media is quite vibrant and open, and almost anything goes. Not everything, almost anything goes. So there are very few holy cows. So in that regard, I would say that it should be debated, and the government should take the initiative, because it's a government document. They have presented it, and they should say, flaunt it, that we are ready to discuss it and bring it as soon as possible to the parliament. If they want an in-house debate or an in-camera debate, that's fine. But it has to be, as Aisha was also saying, the collective ownership or the political ownership has to be there by the parliament. Otherwise, the legitimacy would be missing and lacking.
जी पहले ये जल्दबाजी के मतलब एक छोटी सी बात मैं कर दूं। वो दर्जी को कपड़े देकर आया था, तो काफी देर तक नहीं सिले, वो खुद फौत हो गया, उसका बेटा गया, तो उसने कहा बहुत जल्दी से कपड़ा वापस ले जाओ। तो he said, National Security Advisor himself said that the work on this policy started in 2014. अगर अभी भी आपको जल्दी लगती है तो I don't know. And then मेरे इत्तला के मुताबिक सरताज अजीज साहब started working on that. उससे पहले आपको भी पता होगा, जनरल जंजुआ worked on it. जी उनको उन्होंने काम किया होगा. Very few of you must be knowing that I was also NSA for some time in this incident setup. And actually, I went to, now I can reveal that, we completed everything, got all the inputs, made it into a draft. I went to the Prime Minister, the interim Prime Minister, and asked them that we know that you cannot approve this policy, but at least write a note that we suggest that it should be adopted by the next government. But he disagreed. He said, no, don't do it. We won't do it. I visited Mohit Saab. I told him, in that drawer, the draft is ready. It is there, so you can do whatever. That is how it was made. So, जी उसमें लगता है काफी कुछ है, because मैंने तो इसका नाम चेंज कर दिया था जो आप कह रहे थे. मैंने अंदर से सिक्योरिटी कार्ड दिया था. I had titled it Comprehensive National Policy, and उनको भी सजेस्ट किया, लेकिन उनका नहीं, कुछ लोग कह रहे हैं इसको अंदर डालो, मुझे नहीं पता कौन कह रहे हैं. So I don't agree that it has been done in a hurry. बल्कि आपने बताया कि it was also placed before the committee of वहाँ पर भी हुई, और क्योंकि इतने लोगों ने इसमें input भी डाला. Yes, एक चीज मैं समझता हूँ कि they should have first floated it as a draft policy for some time, for 5-6 months, and then should have adopted, signed फिर बाद में होते. Maybe that was the only में जो था. बाकी जो आप कश्मीर के मतलब कह रहे हैं कि it is soft, कोई it is open ended as far as I see it. I've gone through it. कश्मीर वो कहते हैं कि बिल्कुल UN की रेजोल्यूशन के मुताबिक होना चाहिए, वही हमारा स्टांस है, और वो उसमें भी मेंशन्ड है. बाकी ये जो एक बात उड़ी थी कि we don't seek war with India for the next 100 years or something, मुझे नहीं पता ये कहाँ कही गई. It is not in the policy. Must have, I don't know. जी ये कैसे, मुझसे भी इंडियंस ने पूछा कि अभी आप 100 साल तक नहीं लड़ेंगे, मैंने कहा नहीं अब कल लड़ेंगे, हम कल ही लड़ेंगे आपसे, क्योंकि ये तो लड़ाई तो दो तरफ से होती है भाई, लड़ाई नेवर वन साइडेड, लड़ाई जी ये सब बहुत आता रहा है उसमें, नहीं इसमें नहीं है सर, वो डॉक्यूमेंट में नहीं है। तो आई थिंक कुछ चीजें ऐसी हैं पाकिस्तान की पॉलिसी की, उनमें कुछ एक आध गलत भी है, कि जब तक आप राय आमा को हमवार नहीं करते, unless you convince the populace, if somebody is not understanding Urdu over here, you cannot adopt that policy. Kashmir is one of them. And another one is Israel, recognition of Israel. जो मैं कह रहा हूँ कि सही है गलत उसकी बात में नहीं हम जाते, because you first have to cultivate that thinking in your masses, otherwise it backfires. तो मेरा नहीं ख्याल कि कोई ऐसी बात है about Kashmir. About Kashmir, I always say just two things. One, that we should not talk of other options unnecessarily. We should remain anchored to our stance, which is UN resolution. अगर कोई और बात करनी तो do it later on, because you know it is bad negotiation skill that you go to your second line of defense even before talking. So you should remain anchored to your stance. Whenever the talk starts, then we can think about it. So,
Okay, thank you. I think Samina.
Thank you very much. Samina Yasmin from the University of Western Australia. I think some questions that I had have already been asked, but I've just been wondering the way Moeed Yusuf mentioned the policy and the way the discussion is going on. Are we talking about a national security policy or discussion paper on national security policy? Because they're two different things. And that's where I was really thinking about, General Lodi, what you were saying. His welcoming of commentary and discussion suggests to me that it's not fully a policy. It's a discussion paper open to the public and to the politicians to say, come up with an idea. And then it can be modified. So I think maybe there's a confusion somewhere that I'm still trying to work out. And the second question is, how new is this policy? Because I remember after 1990, 91, this discussion of regional connectivity, the discussion of Central Asian, Iran, Pakistan, and even other countries getting together. That was floated then, and now it's being floated again. So is it really a new policy, geoeconomics, or is it just a new frame, a new wording of the same thing that has been there for years?
Which one of the panelists would like to take it? Yes, please.
Actually, this what you said about that after the breakup of the Soviet Union, there was this talk of connectivity and Pakistan being the natural outlet for the sea for the Central Asian republics. And if you remember, in 1992, there was the first meeting, and it was in Quetta. And remember, Mr. Akram Zaki was the Secretary General of Foreign Affairs, and there was the formation of ECO, Economic Cooperation Organization, which includes Pakistan, Iran, Turkey, Azerbaijan, and the Central Asian republics. And I still remember I was in Uzbekistan in October 1992 at a press conference of President Islam Karimov, just 1 year after the liberation from the Soviet Union. And Karimov said, my vision is, and he is in Tashkent, that we should have an outlet to the sea, Tashkent, Termez, Karachi, because there was no Gwadar there. He talked of that. So Pakistan was the focus. And I told some of my friends in Pakistan that I think now Karachi will be in trouble. It will be destabilized because nobody wants that. So I think now Gwadar is there. This is an idea whose time has come. Because we're talking of Tapi, Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India pipeline. We talk of Iran, Pakistan, there was to be India pipeline. They talk of Qatar pipeline. In fact, there's so much talk of pipelines. People say there'll be a Pipelineistan also because oil, gas. So I think this is and with the Belt and Road Initiative from China, Eurasian Initiative from Russia. So I think, and now the Americans have joined in also, by the way. Build Back Better World is also about infrastructure and connectivity. The European Union has announced the global gateway. So it's very fashionable. And I think for Pakistan, because of our location and our role, we should say the more the merrier. Welcome. Because we should play that role. And remember what the Qaid said in his first interview with a foreign journalist, January 1948 with Life magazine, a lady, by the way, Margaret Bork White, and it's on the internet, that what's the future role of Pakistan? That Pakistan is the pivot of the world placed on the frontier on which the future geopolitics of the world revolves. And that's what is happening now. So I think we should leverage our location and our role to have this outreach to the world. And we are ready for that. And let there be coming in. So that is there. But I think in one document form, it has come for the first time. In 2014, it was the National Action Plan after what happened in Peshawar, the Army Public School, 16th of December 2014. And then it was talked about as a National Internal Security Policy, NIS. So this, as a national security policy now again, because security is a very word which has a lot of resonance. If they had said a national policy, I think they would not have been taken seriously too much. Because General Sahab, security sells. Oh, security, acha. So the whole world is interested. So I think let security be there. But the important thing is, as Aisha was saying, and Shafkat was also saying, it should be debated, discussed, and I think become a genuine consensus document where people take ownership of it to take it forward. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. Most of it is there, but there needs to be conceptual clarity. Okay, we talked of these issues. Tuck, tuck, tuck. What is to be done and how to do it. Thank you.
One thing that why it has become necessary to have a document is that the main policies like foreign policy and defense policy and economic policy, they should not be divergent in a way that they start, creating problems for each other. We know that where the politically, if you look at it futuristic, which area is now rising, which countries are rising, which countries are flattening, from where do we get our military hardware, with which countries we have maximum trade, and where we want to have our political affiliations or military affiliations. So all these things, if they are not aligned, they can go cross to each other and they can create problems. So having a policy which can loosely bind these policies in one direction was required.
Thank you. Thank you. I think we'll just take two more questions because we have to wind up by 12:30. General Khanawaz.
Thank you very much. So my question is to you, General Lodi sir, and partially you have actually you have asked, you just commented on it. The hierarchy that you showed, that there are a number of policies that are going to be subordinate to these policies. And as you said, so that these policies existed in some form or the other. So now that they all need to be aligned, converged, and there has to be a coherence, we have seen that this policy document has invoked a lot of debate. And we understand that all these subsidiary policies that we're going to talk of, they have the horizontal and the vertical linkages. And as Ambassador Kakafel has said, so that even the water policy, its ownership is not visible. So while we fine tune these policies, we align it to this, there has to be greater need of a political, ownership of all these policies. And within that, there has to be a lot of consensus and acceptance amongst various organizations who make those policies. So how do you see that challenge in the coming times?
That is what we mentioned also, that the biggest challenge for NSA and NSD would be this, that you mentioned, that how to make sure that all the lower policies, they are aligned in that direction. And I think the main culprits would be three, and I've already mentioned. The first would be the defense policy, because there's a military mindset. They have certain things in their minds, and they are, and it's a long history that they have been going in that direction. And now if you tell them to change a bit, it is very difficult. Changing a lot is, for example, if somebody comes up with and I think it should be done, that such a large army is unaffordable, which is correct, but then what to do about it? Now, this requires a discussion. I mean, and the military has to be convinced because they are so big and they have become so powerful because of their footprint that now how to convince them. So I think somebody from within the military should come up and say that we need to do this, whatever. Similarly, there can be a thinking of the Foreign Office about various, powers in the world, about America, about China, about Russia, whatever. And maybe it becomes very difficult to ask them to please change course. That is also difficult. So I do understand, and the same is the case with economic policy. It would be horrendous task, and I think nearly impossible task for NSA and NSD in its present organization to actually tell these three areas, the military, the Foreign Office, and the economist, to please align yourself and get yourself going in one direction. I don't know how it will happen.
I think the last question then, because Senator has to leave and we also have to wind up and we still have to do a group photo. Make the question brief, please.
अस्सलाम वालेकुम, मेरा नाम रियाज समकनी है और ताल्लुक साबका कबायली इलाकों से ज़िले कुरम से है। यहाँ पर नमर इस्लामाबाद जर्नलिज्म का स्टूडेंट हूँ। सर मेरा सवाल ये है मुशाहिद हुसैन साहब से और बाकी जो पैनलिस्ट है कि साबका कबायली इलाके जो ब्रीडिंग स्पेस थे टेररिज्म के लिए 9/11 के बाद और ऑपरेशनों में जो सूरत हाल हुआ, तो जो इकोनॉमिक जो सिक्योरिटी फ्रेमवर्क इस पॉलिसी में दिया गया है, तो क्या साबका कबायली इलाकों में जो ज्यादा वहाँ पर जो ग्रीवियंस थे, वो जो टेररिस्ट या जो दिगर लोगों ने एक्सप्लॉइट किया वहाँ के मुकामी लोगों को इस तरफ ले आया, तो क्या इस पॉलिसी फ्रेमवर्क में उनके इकोनॉमिक्स अपलिफ्टिंग के लिए कुछ ऐसे रखा गया है कि वहाँ पर जो सोच परवान चढ़ा है, दहशतगर्दी और जहाँ पसंदी जहाँ पर फैली हुई है, इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर तबाह हो गया है, बावजूद इसके कि जो फाटा मर्जरिंग के लिए रिफॉर्म कमेटी बनाई गई थी सरदारी साहब की, और उसमें 100 बिलियन रुपए रखे गए थे कि मतलब एनुअल बेसिस पे वहाँ पर खर्च होंगे, लेकिन हम देख रहे हैं कि उसके 50% भी खर्च नहीं हो रहा है और जो हेल्थ सेक्टर है, एजुकेशन सेक्टर है, बाकी जो इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर है वो बर्बादी का शिकार है, उतना बेहतर नहीं हुआ है। तो क्या जो हम समझ रहे हैं कि इकोनॉमिक पर्सपेक्टिव की तरफ मुल्क को लेके जाना है, तो वहाँ से जो टेररिज्म आ रही थी या वहाँ के जो लोकल थे, जो जॉब लेस थे, जिनको एक्सप्लॉइट करके फिर दहशतगर्दी की तरफ लेके आ रहे हैं, तो उसके लिए कुछ रखा है इस पॉलिसी में कि वो लोग भी इकोनॉमिक की तरफ आ जाए, दहशतगर्दी से हटकर, और उनकी जो इकोनॉमी है।
शुक्रिया, मेरे ख्याल आपका सवाल समझ आ गया, इनको ही जवाब दे दें।
आपने बड़ा सही सवाल पूछा है, क्योंकि ये एक अभी तक हमारा जो मौकफ है रियासत का फाटा के हवाले से, उसकी बुनियाद एक सिक्योरिटी ड्रिवन है, सिक्योरिटी सेंट्रिक है, और ये इशू 40 साल पुराना है। जब अफगान जिहाद कह लें या अफगान जंग कह लें शुरू हुआ, तो बुनियाद थी फाटा। यहाँ से हमने ट्रेन भी किए मुजाहिदीन, हम से मुराद है अमेरिका भी, मगरब भी, सऊदी अरेबिया भी, सब मिलके, और उसके बाद फिर अफगानिस्तान के साथ मुंसलिक हो गया सारा मामला और वो जंगें चलती रहीं। अब 2 इनिशिएटिव्स आए थे, एक वो था बुश का ROZ, रिकंस्ट्रक्शन अपॉर्चुनिटी जोन्स। ये मुशर्रफ साहब के ज़माने में, आपको या तो 2004 और 5 की बात हुई थी कि वहाँ हम स्पेशल जोन तैयार करेंगे जिसमें लोकल मैन्युफैक्चरिंग होगी और उनके जो एक्सपोर्ट्स होंगे खासतौर से मगरब या अमेरिका के लिए, उसमें कोई ड्यूटी फ्री सारा होगा। वो अमेरिकन कांग्रेस ने खत्म कर। एक प्रपोजल मैंने उसको दी थी अपना रिचर्ड हॉलब्रुक को, जब आया था सेनेटर कैरी को, मैंने कहा बात करते हैं, अब 2 काम करते हैं। एक, इतना पैसा आप लगा रहे हैं, हैव एन अब्राहम लिंकन यूनिवर्सिटी इन फाटा, वो नाम लेते हैं, कम से कम आपका फुटप्रिंट होगा, लोग याद रखेंगे कि आपने 9/11 पर कुछ कहा। दूसरा, मैंने हॉलब्रुक को कहा था कि फाटा के जो लोग हैं, लड़के लड़कियां माशाल्लाह जो पढ़ती हैं, और मैं खुद पढ़ाता भी कोई लेक्चर देता हूँ, बहुत होनहार हैं, बासलाहियत हैं, और उनकी बड़ा शऊर भी है, बड़ी जान है, बड़ा करंट है, उनको आप नौकरियां दें। आपके सारे ताल्लुकात गल्फ में हैं, कतर, कुवैत, UAE, सऊदी अरेबिया, ओमान वगैरह, बहरीन, आप 20,000 वीजे वर्क वीजाज के तैयार कर दें, आपकी कोई खर्चा नहीं होगा, आपने सिर्फ इनको कहना है, और ये फाटा के जो लोग पढ़े लिखे लोग हैं, लड़के लड़कियों की नौकरी मिलेगी। तो वो लो हैंगिंग फ्रूट होगा, लेकिन नहीं हुआ उसमें। अब शताज अजीज साहब के प्लान में आपको याद होगा 100 बिलियन की बात की। अब एक चीज चलो अच्छी होगी, और आपको पता है कि जब पार्लियामेंट में डिस्कशन हुई तो उसमें मैंने भी कहा था कि ये जो FCR है, फ्रंटियर क्राइम्स रेगुलेशन, ये 100 साल पुराना कानून है कि अगर हमारे एक कुरम एजेंसी में गड़बड़ हुई तो सारा घर ही मसमार कर दें। दिस इशू ऑफ कलेक्टिव पनिशमेंट इज अनएक्सेप्टेबल इन द 21st सेंचुरी। तो मेरे ख्याल में इसमें जरा हाईएस्ट पॉलिटिकल लेवल एक खास तवज्जो देनी पड़ेगी, क्योंकि अब तो जम भी कर दिया उन्होंने एक सूबे के साथ, खैबर पख्तूनख्वा के साथ, लेकिन जो मसले मसाइल हैं वो उधर ही। और आपको पता है कि जो जिस किस्म की करप्शन जो इंस्टीट्यूशनलाइज्ड है थ्रू द पॉलिटिकल एजेंट, तो मेन इशू इज एजुकेशन एंड एम्प्लॉयमेंट। और आप देख लें कि अब जो गेंस थे हमारे दहशतगर्दी के मुहिम के खिलाफ, अब वो आहिस्ता आहिस्ता कम कम हो रहे हैं, क्योंकि हम रोज इक्का दुक्का वाकया हो रहे हैं। और क्या वजह है? अफगानिस्तान में 5000 लोग हैं TTP, और वो फ्रीलांस टेररिस्ट हैं, वो किसी के कंट्रोल में नहीं है, और उन्होंने अपनी एक्टिविटी बहाल कर दी है। तो ये मेरे ख्याल में इसमें पाकिस्तान अफगानिस्तान के ताल्लुकात का भी है, और इसमें हमारे मुल्क की तरजीहात में कौमी हवाले से भी, सूबाई हवाले से भी इसको आगे लेके जाना पड़ेगा, क्योंकि एक वरना फिर यही इलाका पे जो इतना जरखेज है और इकोनॉमिक डेवलपमेंट, ये फिर दहशतगर्दी और इंतहा पसंदी के लिए फिर हमवार करेगा। थैंक यू।
Thank you. I think with that, we will conclude this session. And once again, thank you so much for taking the time out. And it was a very productive discussion. And I hope the audience has also benefited and developed a better understanding on the NSP. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. We will, Mazda Nadeem Riaz, if you'd like to come here so we can have a group photo. And